growth requires more than capital.
Why do we call it the cheat code? Nobody said growth had to be fair.
Revenue solves everything.
Welcome to the cheat code. What was our fastest path to revenue?
We tend to like to do things the hard way.
What's the cheat code? It's giving yourself an unfair advantage over the others.
What is it that really works, and how are we going to grow these organizations?
That's our cheat code. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Cheat Code. I am Josh Wagner, joined by Justin Gray. Justin, what's happening?
Excited to learn about some cheat codes.
Learn about some cheat codes. Well, we are still in season 2 of The Cheat Code. And as you know, season 2 is focused on partnerships as a key go-to-market lever. And all of our guests are gurus, experts, ninjas, hackers, whatever you want to call them in the partnership arena. So today's guest is no different. He is an innovative category creator, the author of Ecosystem-Led Growth, co-founder and CEO at Crossbeam. Bob Moore, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. I've been excited to see the focus in this season and thrilled and flattered to be here in person.
Yeah, we're super pumped to have you, and especially taking some time out right before, what is it called now?
ELGCon, yeah, the Ecosystem-Led
ELGCon.
Growth Conference. We're hosting it this week in Austin, Texas, and we've got another one happening in London in mid-July.
Had a busy week.
Well, again, we thank you for taking time away. I know that those conferences are a big lift by you and your team.
No problem. Worked out great.
All right, so let's dive right in and let's talk about your go-to-market partnership cheat code.
Yeah, for me, it's funny, right? I have built, Crossbeam is my third company in SaaS, and the first two allowed partnerships to be this really important growth lever, but they were also very, very data-centric and data-driven businesses. And it kind of has given me somewhat unique lens to look at this world through, which is the data lens. And I'd say that, my cheat code by and large when building out ecosystems is that in addition to all the standard stuff you probably hear about the ways in which partners can directly influence deals by directly getting involved, being hands-on, making intros, doing back channel references. There's also this secondary kind of background radiation that goes on. That's a fringe benefit of having an ecosystem that can actually become the primary benefit if done at scale, which is to actually use the data exhaust that's coming out of your ecosystem as signal. And by that, I mean intent signal, buying signal, basically indications as to what accounts you ought to be focusing on and what ways you ought to use to pursue those accounts, be it customizing your messaging or pitching particular features, et cetera. I can put a finer point on that, which is to say, a lot of what we do at Crossbeam is to help make this process of account mapping easier, right? It's getting you the answers to questions like, hey, partner, how many customers do we have in common and who are they? Or, hey, partner, I'm trying to sell to these 500 accounts. Have you closed a deal with any of them in the last 60 days? Well, if you can get your hands on that data, and then you look at that data in aggregate across everybody that's in your partner ecosystem, all of a sudden you have this incredible fire hose of buying activity and buying signal around all the accounts you care about and what the other companies in your ecosystem know about the behaviors going on inside those accounts. And in the modern landscape where people don't buy software because of features anymore, they buy software because of how it interoperates with the other software and services they already use. That might be some of the most interesting and valuable buying signal about what accounts to focus on and how to target them that's really ever existed, right? Talk about intent data and all the forms that it takes. This second party data out of your ecosystem is an incredibly profoundly powerful growth lever. And when you use it, you don't always have to insert a human in the middle. This is data that your sales reps can use to inform how to spend their day or how to craft their messaging. That doesn't require calling up the partner manager and asking them to facilitate something. It doesn't require calling up the human being inside of your partner company and having them insert themselves into a 3-way phone call, which takes forever to coordinate and kind of introduces undue risk into the deal. It's just intelligence, it's insight, it's perspective on what's going on out there in the field. And it's probably some of the most powerful stuff that most companies have and don't even realize that they can use in that way.
All right. I love it. Data exhaust is the cheat code. Haven't heard that yet. I'm totally into it, but I got to ask you. So Justin and I spent a decade helping big organizations, small, medium, and large companies implement marketing automation.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the biggest challenges we always heard was, that all sounds great. The dream you're selling me, the being intent and data-driven dream sounds amazing, but how do I actually get that set up and put it into practice? Because everything you're describing to me sounds really hard.
Well, this is, if you look back at my last companies, it was an absolute, can I curse on this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely.
Please.
It was, I'll keep it soft. It was an absolute hellscape, right? Among other things, to attempt to basically make these large at scale data benefits, or frankly, any benefits from partner programs, something that didn't break at scale. You have this really weird like Metcalfe's law thing going on where like the effort required to maintain an ecosystem kind of grows exponentially as the ecosystem gets bigger, but the benefits of it grow linearly. And it's like, that's the wrong ratio. The thing that's really cool is, and not to relentlessly plug Crossbeam here, but like we really started Crossbeam to solve for this precise thing, which is the age-old practice of account mapping, which I'm sure you both know and love and have encountered, is a very, very broken process of basically like emailing a bunch of spreadsheets that you probably shouldn't be emailing back and forth between you and every single one of your partners. And basically playing Battleship, right? You're literally like, E7, do you guys have any relationships with this account? And these very precise, curated, weirdly filtered lists that are very difficult to match against, that only happen once a year or once a quarter across an ecosystem of tens or hundreds of partners, you get this really weird, terrible, dirty pile of data that really cannot be focused or automated, or most importantly, plugged into other systems, like, for example, an ABM platform or a marketing automation solution or something like that. It was absolute chaos. I saw it at RJ Metrics, my first company. I saw it at Magento, who acquired RJ Metrics. I saw it at Adobe, who acquired Magento. I saw it at Stitch, my second company. I saw it at Talend, who acquired Stitch. This isn't any problem specific to those companies. It's an industry problem. And the great source of that issue is that like math is working against you. Like all those questions that I mentioned before, like how many customers do we have in common and who are they? You can only get to that answer if you can draw a Venn diagram between your data and the data of some other company that sits outside of your company's walls. And the only way to draw a Venn diagram is if you have all of the data from both of the sets. Well, herein lies the problem, right? Like in order to figure out what customers we have in common, I have to tell you who all of my customers are, which for a whole host of reasons is just an absolute non-starter and should be for just about everybody. Right. So the innovation with Crossbeam was Crossbeam gets to be almost like this escrow service for data that sits in between companies and their ecosystems and allows them to set these extremely fine-grained controls and rules around what data makes it into what hands that are really tethered to the idea that you have some shared relationship or some reason to collaborate around a company where you both have a pre-existing relationship or connection. And basically it unlocks this data layer, which is made up of all of the middles of all of the Venn diagrams that exist between you and all the companies in your ecosystem. And then boom, there's your implementation question answered, right? Like you funnel that into your RevOps team or your data team, or, frankly, through like a Salesforce widget or a Chrome extension to your end sales reps out in the field. And you've kind of unlocked this whole universe of new playbooks. And that's this book, Ecosystem-Led Growth. It's just, that's what the book is, right? It's those playbooks.
So I'm glad you brought that aspect up because, you mentioned earlier intent data, and you think about, we spent so much time and effort trying to capture technographic signals, right? Like in really bootleg manners, right? Like, hey, who put this script up on their site in the last 30 days? Because...
Totally. I won't say which company it was, but one of my past experiences had a six-figure annual bill with built with, right? Like the massive scraping at scale company.
Yeah. So you think about if you can actually, bring that in a more comprehensive manner, not just, they deployed the software, but hey, here's the buying center there. Here's, the nuances, what they're ultimately trying to accomplish. Like all of that color, that exhaust, as you mentioned, is just incredibly powerful from a target account, ABM, go-to-market engagement standpoint. How do you, you mentioned the security side of it, which I think is super important, but like even just from the behavior side of it, like how do you get folks incentivized and kind of bought into creating that muscle memory that like, hey, we want to put data into the system, to ultimately accomplish this nebulous like value down the road. Like what have you done for me lately type mentality? How do you overcome that?
This is I'll yes and your question and make the question for me even harder, which is like, yes, all of that is true within any individual company who might use this stuff. Then you have a secondary problem that makes it even harder, which is it only works if all your partners are already doing
Right.
it. So you have this incredible cold start problem on top of it all. Even if you can get huge conviction in your company, if you're the first one to sign up for Crossbeam and none of your partners are on there, you're going to have a bad day. There's no such thing as single player mode on these network graphs. So this is where, the company's about 6 years old now. The first 3 years of this company were a lot of glass chewing to overcome that exact cold start problem, because it was really rooted in the fact that if companies signed up individually, it just didn't work. And the big insight that we had, probably 6 months or so into trying to onboard companies was the only ones that were successful were ones that we signed up in pairs. We got people onboarded. We used to call them joint jam sessions. My old VP of sales used to say it's like landing 2 jumbo jets on the same runway at the same time, side by side. But it was like a sales call for 2 potential clients at once, where the demo and the pilot and everything else about the product was actually done not for the companies, but for their partnership, like the line connecting those dots, right? So we did those for years. And what was very cool was the people that participated in those joint jam sessions, they ended up being successful and having a successful partnership on. And what's the next thing they do after that first partnership is successful? They invite in all of their partners. And for those companies, that second order effect, it's a way different story, because they don't ever have to worry about single player mode, because the mechanism by which they found out about this thing in the first place was by being invited in by somebody else who's already fully on and already fully implemented. So the second they get implemented, boom, they've got a direct path to the data and the value story. And it turns out that this ends up being the answer to your second question as well, which is it's absolutely essential that Crossbeam has a free tier that is very, very robust in what you can do for free, and that it has a product-led growth self-serve experience for onboarding that's available to companies that really want to move fast. Now, we have an enterprise sales team, and if you want to go down that road, there's all kinds of ways we can kind of like let you buy before you try. But we are classically, there's now 19,000 companies on Crossbeam. 7 out of every 10 of those that signed up because they were invited in by somebody else who's on the platform and kind of self-serve their onboarding. And what that gives you in your ability to make the case internally and kind of show a path to value is what we call everybody signing up with an atomic network. And the atomic network is just the minimum number of partners or the minimum use case that you need in order to show what this value looks like when it shows up. And even if you just connect to one small partner who maybe is smaller than you, or maybe is sharing a little bit less data for whatever reason, but that gives you some incremental signal or some incremental knowledge that leads to you changing who you're reaching out to, how you're reaching out, how you're pursuing an account. That one anecdotal data point is very often enough to say, all right, let's see what it's like if we had 5 of our partners on here. And in a world like today, where we have these tens of thousands of companies on the network, the fun thing is it's very rare actually that companies need to invite in their partners. Very often those partners are already there. And it's really just a matter of kind of establishing the connections and setting up that data sharing. So we're kind of in like a mid to late stage network graph maturity at this point, where you almost get to the other end of the problem, which is like network saturation, right? We stop caring about new nodes on the graph, and instead we care about the density of the edges, which is a whole. I could geek out on network graph growth hacking for a long time, but that's the story of my life right now.
Well, how can if we narrow this down? We talked about data at scale and intent signals and all these things, but a lot of our audience here is startups, right? So early stage companies that are maybe establishing their first partnership and trying to even understand, where do I go? How do I be a data-driven partner when I may not even have a partner, right? What are some of the things that they should be looking at? What can the data tell them about who to partner with?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of a framework for thinking about this, and then I'll maybe give you a specific example of like a tactic that can be used. So from a framework standpoint, if you read this book, one of the things you'll learn is that I love 2x2 matrices. I feel like every complex problem in the world can be answered with a 2x2 matrix, because most of these questions, like is ELG strategy right for me, for example, is answered by 2 dimensions that need to kind of both happen at the same time in order for it to be really exciting. So in the case of like, is this right for my company, or is it worth spending time on, or how do I know that this is going to work? The 2 dimensions that we think about are one of them is scale. which is fairly straightforward. And the reality is that the larger you are or the more mature you are as a business, the easier it does become. And part of that has to do with gravitational pull. And, if you're a really large company, the likelihood that other companies will go through exerting effort to participate in your ecosystem or partner with you is just higher because you have a bigger megaphone, you have a bigger audience. The total addressable market represented by your customer base and the folks within the reach of your brand, it's just bigger. So you can actually use that gravitational pull to build ecosystem around you when you exist at scale. But there's a second dimension here, which is how much ecosystem DNA is in the value proposition of your company and your product. And what I mean by that is, like, if you think about a company like Stitch, my second company, that business was a data pipelines company. So all we did was, it was technology that would suck data out of all the SaaS tools that you use, and it would clean it up, and then it would deposit it into your data warehouse where you do all your analytics, right? So if you think about how people consume that product, you literally can't use Stitch unless you use other SaaS products and you use a data warehouse. If you're missing that, we're middleware, right? Like if you're missing those other two pieces of the chain, then there is no reason to need Stitch or way to use it. So because of that, we were a 100% ecosystem DNA company. There was not a single deal or a single customer that came on board where the use of other products in the same stack with us was not something that existed and likely was a precipitating factor that led to someone purchasing or considering our product. I would put that all the way at the 100% end of the ecosystem DNA scale. Now, you look at the other end and think about like a self-contained services company that just delivers logos, right? It's like, okay, maybe they use Photoshop or some awesome AI tool, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like there's inputs and outputs, and there's not a lot of other stuff that necessarily needs to exist or is being procured at the same time. Honestly, that might be a terrible example because you might also be building a website and then you need to host that website and whatever else. But the important question to ask is like, where on that spectrum is your company's ecosystem DNA? And for most modern SaaS companies and technology companies, it's certainly to the right of like the 50th percentile mark, right? If you participate in the modern cloud economy, you probably participate in the modern API economy. There's probably data from other places that help make your product more valuable and places that the outputs of your product go, right? That help deliver the value. And if that's true, you're pretty darn ecosystem oriented, even if you don't have any partners yet, right? Like the core of your value proposition when it's fully realized is going to have an ecosystem component. So where we land then is with this 2x2 matrix, like how big are you from a scale standpoint, kind of on the y-axis, and then how much ecosystem DNA do you have on the x-axis? Well, if you're in the top right quadrant, like, holy moly, I probably don't even have to tell you any of this stuff. Chances are that you are already an ELG company, whether you know it or not, and you are likely, like, the realization of the next 10xing of your business, whatever that means, is probably going to come from these ecosystem strategies. It's going to come from heavily leveraging ecosystems, marketplaces, channel and technology partners. And those, you look at the big scale companies like, whether it's Microsoft or Salesforce or anybody in the B2B sides of those businesses, it's like, what do you talk about? You talk about the Microsoft channel universe. You talk about the Salesforce App Exchange and what a powerful enabling layer that is. Like, it's no surprise. So that's the top right quadrant. That's easy. Bottom left quadrant is also easy. Probably like not quite a good investment of your time yet. If you're small and you don't have a lot of ecosystem DNA, maybe don't buy the book. Maybe if you get a free copy somewhere, put it on the shelf, right? Until either your company value prop has evolved or pivoted into having more ecosystem DNA, or you've achieved a good amount of scale. Where it gets interesting is those other two quadrants. So on the top left, you have big companies with low amounts of the ecosystem DNA. This is where it gets really interesting because the amount of lift required to start doing ecosystem stuff is quite low. You probably actually have people knocking on your door saying, hey, how can I, if you're a huge company, you probably throw a customer conference and there's probably a bunch of other random vendors that come and sponsor it because they want to get in front of your customers. Even if you have no channel, even if you have no technology integrations, there is this idea that your product used alongside or as part of a universe of other solutions is better or allows people to better realize the strategic goal. Yeah. So there's some kind of like strategic alignment that exists between you and other companies, even if you haven't made the investments of actually integrating your technology or training their salespeople or anything like that. That's a really exciting place to be. And it's a place where there are pretty low lift ways to potentially, dip your toes in the water and, allow for, even if it's at the top of the funnel, like co-marketing initiatives, like doing events, co-branded events, like doing kind of mail merge, kind of cross sending between email lists, just to appreciate how the reach that can be achieved by having go-to-market plays run through this theoretical ecosystem, how that impacts the growth of your company. And if it turns out to be tangible and interesting, then it may give you the opportunity to kind of roll into starting to build out some of your own ecosystem plays, whether that's releasing APIs and allowing for tech integrations, whether it's a training program for channel partners. There are all these investments you can make at scale when you have scale that could have a really, really profound impact. Finally, the bottom right quadrant is the one you actually asked me about, which is these companies that likely are subscale, but that probably just by nature of how recently they were founded and the fact that they're part of the tech economy do likely have ecosystem DNA. And there's at least some component for that. This is the most exciting group to me because it's all about opportunity, right? And the only thing separating these companies from those folks that we all aspire to be in that top right quadrant is scale. So the question is solving this chicken and egg problem of like using that ecosystem DNA to achieve scale, which then puts you in that quadrant. And this is where things that are available today that weren't even available 5 years ago start to get really exciting. And again, I come back to the data here. So there are an enormous number of companies that are likely bigger than you, who are out there, who are on a platform like Crossbeam, actively participating in it with large swaths of their partner ecosystem, many of which include significantly smaller companies. Now, why are they doing that? Because they know that the area under the curve of the long tail kind of adds up to potentially as much value and data and insights as one of those companies at the head of that curve. Because of these data first strategies, a lot more companies are opening their eyes and kind of opening their kind of collaborations to many, many more partners farther and farther down the long tail, because it doesn't require as much human management. It doesn't require as much upfront investment. So what you want to do is try and identify these cases where it may not be fruitful to go after like a Fortune 500 company and say, hey, do you want to be my partner? But this entire universe is just a exercise in like big fish eat medium fish, eat little fish, eat tiny fish, right? Like you look for somebody that's kind of at the next logical phase, kind of up the food chain in their evolution, but not so far away from you that it's a complete David and Goliath situation. And you say, look, it's probably a large investment and complicated for us to both or either build a technology integration. We may not have stood up enough, processes to somehow have like a formal partnership. But let's do this. Let's just ask two questions. One, for our target markets, not for our existing customers, but for the people that we wish we could target, like our prospect lists, the lists that we've assembled that kind of represent our ideal customer profile. How well do those overlap and intersect with one another? And here's where you can do one of these Venn diagram account mapping exercises, like for free, right? In the free tier of Crossbeam, and get a really good sense of, for these kind of three different levels of specificity, my prospects that I wish I was selling to, my opportunities that I'm actively selling to, and my customers who are already actively paying me. Let's compare those three groups of mine to those three groups of my prospective theoretical partner. And we don't even need to necessarily share the identities of those companies. We can look at the overall count or the percentage overlap that exists. And if you can do that with 3, with 5, with 10 companies where you're considering making the investment of building an integration or doing a co-marketing campaign, you can really, really quickly paint a picture of, wow, there's something really profound here about the way in which the ideal customer profile for us and this other company actually overlap. And then even if you have 2 customers in common, like a really, really small number, well, you can share the data on who those customers are and run the analysis of like, are these better customers than the rest of our customers? And this is where it starts to get more interesting, right? It's like what we tend to see is when people identify these really high value partners and partnerships, typically what you're seeing is higher ACVs, close rates that are faster, competitive win rates that are higher. Just generally speaking, you have these like kindred spirit alignment of the value proposition of products, even if they're not integrated yet. And that gives you this on-ramp to basically having preemptively A/B tested your entire partner ecosystem against each other without having done any work. And that is a really, really killer feature because you can use that to have much, much higher confidence that this stuff will work. And then you keep the account mapping open over time. And it does go from a chicken and egg problem to a perpetual motion machine where these things actually build on each other and reinforce that. So I think it really is about like figuring out who your peers are or who your like peers plus ones are, and leading with the data before the work and the investment, and just trying to get as large a sample size as you can before you start making these calls on where to place those bets.
Does that sound familiar at all, Josh? I mean,
Yeah,
we literally
we just got off
had
a call.
this phone call like prior to this podcast,
Right before we got on with you.
Which is still so crazy to me that, like, you know, you talk to people who are, you know, either in the vendor ecosystem or consultants or just have run this motion over time, and it's so ubiquitous in terms of like how you get started with this stuff. Like, hey, let's put the data out there. Let's figure out where we overlap. Is this a natural partnership? And then something else that you said in terms of like, hey, let's not go, you know, try to partner with Goliath every time. Let's go, you know, one or two rungs up. And it just seems to be in such contrast to still where people's natural mindset goes. But, you know, you mentioned something which is kind of always my axe to grind, where, you know, folks, they want to be data driven. That, hey, you got to show me exactly my path to value here. But then you realize pretty quickly that they're not measuring the things that matter already. And this is the reason why it's an axe to grind, is so many times we talk to clients and they'd be like, we just want someone that can get us from X to Y. And it's like, great, all right, where is X right now? Well, we haven't, you know, we don't have good data there, or we haven't benchmarked ourselves. So it's like, well, you can't tell me where I'm starting from. So it almost becomes this exercise of like, let's figure out where that starting line's at before I can even like engage with you. But I'm curious, with such a kind of a massive free tier, and, you know, you're getting people in the systems and they're seeing value on a day-to-day basis. But like, do you find that you often have to, and I'm curious in terms of like just Crossbeam's functionality, like how much time do you guys spend on showing people their actual, you know, lift in velocity, their ACV increase, you know, like those KPIs?
Yeah.
How much do you have to map that out versus like, are people able to manage those on their own and draw a line to that value?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and you're right. This is actually my first company, RJ Metrics. Our whole business was basically, it was an analytics platform for e-commerce companies. So it was a really robust platform where you could go in and, you know, connect your shopping cart and ingest your data, and you could go down to the SQL level and write your own SQL queries, and you could use this WYSIWYG editor to build your own charts and graphs and filter by them. And like, it was so powerful. And then fast forward, you know, 5-6 years when we're at the scale at which we sold the company. And if you went back and did an analysis, like 95% of the dashboards that people used and got the most value of were the ones that were like, they were turnkey, right? Like you turn the platform on and we just like spoon feed them to you. So like, it was useful to have that ability to like custom dissect your cohort analysis on 50 different dimensions. But really it turned out that, you know, to your point, right? Like there's an extent to which people do love to not have to do the legwork, and really are. And frankly, this is partly why it was so necessary to write this book, is people want to know what other people are doing and how other people are measuring these things and what's working in other places.
That was always
like,
the answer. Like, hey, what dashboards do you want to see? Well, what's best practice? It's like, all right,
it's exactly right. And the social proof of XYZ, like if you can crack open this book and say, well, Procore does it this way and Fivetran does it that way and Stripe does it this other way, you can say, okay, I think those are good comps, right? I can pick one of those. And that, so anyway, parlaying that into your question about, you know, the partnership strategy stuff and how much people kind of need a helping hand along the way. It is something that we do in the product, kind of soup to nuts for that exact reason. So one of the things that we have these attribution dashboards, and we're able to do this kind of like inferred attribution after the fact, like a post hoc attribution model, where you basically say, okay, let's take a look at all the deals that closed in the last 90 days at my company, and let's break them down into two cohorts. One of those cohorts is the companies that were already using product X prior to them closing a deal with us. And the rest of the cohort are the ones that were not. Or you could say, hey, all the ones that were using any product in this category, right? Versus all the ones that were not. And then just look at the deals. And we look at these things around like, how many days was the opportunity open? What was the ACV? How many closed lost opportunities did you have that were also true for this, right? So what's the win rate on it? And, you know, a couple of other factors in there. You can slice it out by sales reps and geo and other things. But it basically tells a story, which is there something intrinsically better about companies where this is true, right? They're already using product X, or they're already using, something in the category of X. What happens when you have a combination of two products? And it's like we call that the stack strategy, right? It's like, okay, someone's building a stack. They're building the modern data stack, right? Or the modern marketing stack, or the modern AI stack. And it's like, they have 2 out of the 3 products and you're the third one. And it's what does it mean when you meet a company that's true for? Well, it means that you're way more likely to sell a deal and you're going to sell that deal faster. B, who are those companies that's true about? And those are both things that you can only get inside of Crossbeam, right? Because it's basically the byproduct of being able to draw those Venn diagrams and kind of, filter down to the identities of folks that's true for.
Super interesting. Do you find in that process, can they decorate some of those aspects, kind of post-mortem, or is that all based on, data that you were able to see because of the data sharing between those organizations, and then just the normal deal process? The reason I ask that is I find from an attribution standpoint, specifically as it relates to partners, there's so much like, oh, well, there was this other thing that took place and that's not reflected, you know what I mean, from a system standpoint.
Totally. And there's also this idea of like sourced versus influenced attribution, right? And I think a lot of what I just described, I hesitate to even use the word attribution, because it really is more of kind of like an affinity analysis, right? Or like a propensity analysis around like when this is a true technographic property of a company, like what is the implication on how it's going to make its way through your sales funnel. And sure, you can call that attribution. You can say it's, there's like this correlation causation question of like, yeah, this is predictably true in enough circumstances that it's unquestionably like an exercise in A causes B. But at the same time, that company may have shown up because an SDR called them, or they might have clicked on an ad, and like you get in this whole multi-touch problem where it's very difficult to go back and call that like a proper sourced attribution with a capital A. It's much more to say like, where should that SDR be spending their time in the first place? Which ads should you be buying in the first place to make people click? Which events should you be going to in the first place to get that badge scan? So it's a little bit less of like trying to get the partner team's credit for stuff, and a little bit more of like trying to inform strategy by virtue of these propensities that exist. So yeah, you're right. And we try to, I cover this a little bit in the book too, is like I kind of intentionally just like sidestep the exercise in trying to solve attribution with a capital A, which kind of like haunts every single human being and piece of technology that has ever existed in the go-to-market stack. This kind of lives in that fold. It's no cleaner or dirtier, but I think it is higher conviction that it works just by looking at the hard facts.
Yeah, I think that's where the ecosystem DNA aspect that you mentioned comes in. Like at some point, you just have to have, and this, I really do believe this has to be top down. Like you have to have someone in that organization that fundamentally believes that the 3 of us together are better than a single thread there, and we just see that over and over and over again, where it's like, yeah, I know there's value here, and therefore I'm willing to keep up with the exercise and make additional investment.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's a little bit of this. It's like a first principles level belief system that buyer behavior has fundamentally changed in the last, call it 10 or 15 years as a result of the API economy and the cloud economy. And like I was saying before, right? Like that Mark Andreessen quote, like software is eating the world, which I totally subscribe to and has proven very true. You look at it in recent years, you could almost make an argument like ecosystems are eating software, right? Or is like when that quote was coined, a lot of SaaS tools would win or lose based on how well they had implemented Ajax and like a responsive UI, right? And like these little micro experience that existed in front of the front end. And I think you look at buyer behaviors today, and those things are secondary to this idea of, okay, we have these 8 other tools that are kind of seamlessly, or maybe with some seams, integrated within each other in our existing stack. And we want to fold you into that. And if you sit out on an island and there's no interconnectivity to that, both from a literal data standpoint, but also from like a training and a implementation philosophy and like a, team alignment standpoint, then you're not going to win, no matter how shiny your buttons are. And I think that is, that's a real important change in behavior of the people that are buying, that then informs where people need to exert energy in order to win.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, Bob. So before we let you go, it sounds like, being data driven, using data exhaust as a key cheat in your partner strategy. I love that. Tell us about where this has gone wrong. A partner horror story where the data maybe was the wrong track.
Oh, this is a really interesting question. Yeah. I think that there's like here's what I'll say. Like the number one pitfall of this is we do get into a little bit of this like really interesting situation in a lot of these companies where we love our partnership teams and our partner people, right? It's like the first persona that ever used and adopted Crossbeam, and partner teams are like this essential. They're almost like they're the glue layer that is capable of establishing these connections between companies because they hold the keys to the relationships. But then you also get this secondary thing, which is the value layer, where the actual value is derived from doing all that work is on the go-to-market side. It's the sales leaders, it's the marketing leaders, it's the people out in the field that are carrying the quotas and changing their behavior as a result of this stuff. So there's really important duality that exists between these partnership teams and these go-to-market teams. And one of the things that I did not expect getting into this industry that we have gotten very immersed in is the baggage that exists in the relationships between those teams. And I think I would say that the full realization of this value that I'm describing here, partner teams are necessary, but not sufficient to fully realize it. And you can be a partner team and use Crossbeam to get an enormous amount of value out of it. You can figure out who to partner with. You can figure out which partnerships are going well. You can kind of like use it as a way to incentivize partners and reward good partners and things like that. That's great. That's kind of a self-contained use case. But if it stops there and you do all this work basically in service of the KPIs of the partner team, and there's not alignment between what a win looks like to the partner team and what a win looks like to the go-to-market organization, then it's a tragedy, because what you've done is created all of this data exhaust and not allowed it to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I have seen some partner teams that really, really hold on to ownership of that, and for a bunch of internal kind of, whether it's political or institutional reasons, make it absolutely necessary that anytime this data or knowledge is going to leave the realm of the partner team, a human being has to be like attached to it and bringing it into a deal. And look, to get started, that couldn't potentially be, there's a bunch of reasons why that might be smart. But I think it's also kind of indicative of the fact that I think partner teams are kind of undervalued in a lot of orgs and have kind of, because of that, been trained to make sure they can get their wins when they get them, and they want to retain close ownership of this stuff. And then B, that sales teams are skeptical of partners because they think that partners introduce outside risk factors into their deals or slow those deals down, or kind of like muck around and take credit for stuff that like the sales rep has been working
that old chestnut
for a long time.
Never.
Yeah. And this is like, when I go up on this soapbox, I never get more head nods than when I'm talking about this stuff. But it is like, you go to it's kind of this unspoken elephant in the room that is almost so well understood by everybody in this business that they don't need to talk about it. But because of that, it seems like a thing that like nobody wants to talk about. But it's a very, very real thing that's probably happening in every company. So anyway, from a failure standpoint, right, the failure mode here is not having that cross-functional collaboration that exists between teams that really involves the really awesome necessary work of the partner team, but infuses that in a highly, highly aligned way with the work of the go-to-market teams by having shared goals, having shared OKRs or KPIs or whatever system your company runs on. There's an awesome chapter in the book, a guy named Dave Goldstein, who is the head of ecosystem-led growth at Braze, shares his philosophy for this and how he brought it to life in this thing he calls the ELG tetrahedron, which is kind of like where you have like partnerships and salespeople and ops kind of all aligning to create this ELG thing. And he has a really, really awesome illustration of that and story of it from inside of Braze. So it's a chapter worth checking out on the subject.
For sure.
I love it. Well, I love that story. When we were in scrappy startup mode and we were partnering with organizations much larger than us, I was playing the role of partner leader and sales leader. And I'd get on these calls, and if the partner person, when they said, all right, well, let's do a list share, I would just like hang up on them.
Yeah.
To your point earlier, like, oh, let's trade lists. I wanted nothing to do with that, right? Because I just knew it was this black hole of nothing actually happening.
Totally. Tons of risk and no outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've obviously heard a lot about ecosystem-led growth and a little bit about Crossbeam, but give the audience a quick overview of the platform, the conference, the book, anything you want, and where they can find you.
Yeah, so finding us is easy, crossbeam.com. And I also have a personal website at robertjmoore.com, which is where a lot of the book stuff lives.
There we go.
But Crossbeam at a really high level, we've fortunately been able to kind of organically, get through a lot of what it is here. But at its core, it's it's this network of 19,000 companies and growing who basically trust Crossbeam as this highly secure kind of intermediary that allows them to do data discovery with their partners. And we make it really seamless to kind of get at the stuff that matters most really quickly. And typically that sits at the realm of, hey, how does my CRM data intersect with yours? So fully realize, if you think about this from like a sales rep or a sales leader's perspective, imagine a world where you're looking at an account and you're trying to figure out how to win that account or how to go after that deal. And you have a little window you can look through inside of your Salesforce.com page, and you can peek in there and you can see all the data from all the CRM systems of your partners and what they know about that account, what they've been willing to tell you about that, because it's in their interest as well for y'all to win together. That's what Crossbeam offers, right? We are that little window, and we take care of all the data governance and all the hard work involved in making that possible and appropriate. And it's free to start. So it should have everybody on there kicking the tires at least at crossbeam.com.
Awesome. Well, everyone, take a visit to crossbeam.com. Check out Robert on his website.
Stop emailing Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Stop emailing Excel spreadsheets. Yeah.
It's bad for business. So if this is your first time listening, really appreciate it. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. We'd love that. Bob, we really, really thank you for joining the show and bringing your insights on data and data exhaust.
Great to be here. What a fun topic to geek out on. Thanks for indulging me.
Appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. So on behalf of Justin and myself, this has been another episode of The Cheat Code. Thanks for listening.
Growth requires more than capital.
Why do we call it the cheat code? Nobody said growth had to be fair.
Revenue solves everything.
Welcome to the cheat code. What was our fastest path to revenue?
We tend to like to do things the hard way.
What's the cheat code? It's giving yourself an unfair advantage over the others.
What is it that really works, and how are we going to grow these organizations?
That's our cheat code.